So welcome everybody. Good to see you here, and thanks for joining me today for our fourth week of Relax, Focus, De-Stress, and Connect. And today we're going to focus on that last part of connection, social connection, our social health and compassion for ourselves and others. And so let's dive right in. You see my contact info there, so do feel free to contact me and reach out if there's something you would like later. We do certain classes for departments and things like that. So if you want us to do something at a staff meeting or um, whatever you happen to be doing, we've got a few things coming up in May. So Nurses Week and 10 Days of Gratitude and Mental Health Awareness Month. So we'll be doing some things in May as well. Anyway, to get going, just wanted to ask, especially if you've been in on any of the previous sessions, how's your practice going? But actually, before I dive into that, I like to start with a quick mindful minute. And we're simply going to focus on the breath just to help us kind of be here now, bring our awareness to the present moment. So you don't have to close your eyes, but you can if that helps. And all we're going to do is be aware of the breath. Just follow the breath in and out of the body, just as it is, the way it is right now. Just let the breath breathe itself. And if you want to take a longer in-breath and out-breath to really feel it, and you might notice where you feel the breath, whether it's at the nose or the chest or the belly. And as kind of an introduction to what we'll be doing later, as you breathe in, focus on that in-breath and let that in-breath be for you. And as you breathe out, you might think of someone in your life, someone that you're close to, or even to anybody. And as you breathe out, you might get a sense of breathing out for them. So breathing in for you and breathing out for another. And then just let your mind and your body rest for a second. You might have been very busy leading up to this. And that's our start. That's our practice just to get going. Hopefully it helps to kind of center us and bring us to the here and now. And by the way, if you need to have lunch, that's fine. I'm recording this, but I'm only recording it with my image on that. So you can keep your video on or off. And please do feel free to use the chat feature if you have a question, or you can also speak up. I think that's fine. We're not too large of a group. But I did want to ask and do a check-in, as I said, especially if you were in on some of the previous sessions. I've made some suggestions about practicing. We covered relaxation in the first, focusing on the second, and then de-stressing on the third. So there's been a bunch of different practices that we've tried and I've suggested. So I actually have a little poll. I'm going to see if I can bring that up and be a way for you to answer that question. So let's launch this. Hopefully this works. So as you can see, hopefully you can see, and all you have to do is answer this first question. Have you been able to practice some of the relaxing, focusing, or de-stressing exercise? And I've given you a few different options here. So, and just kind of find out. Give you another, so 12 out of 12, great, excellent. 13 out of 13, very good. So good. So this is very encouraging, I think. So the first question, have you been able to practice some of the things that we've tried out? And we get a range here, of course, but I see 61% say 2 to 3 times a week, and that's great. Nobody said daily, but that's understandable. It's pretty hard to do these practices each and every day, even for myself. So 2 to 3 times a week, I think, is quite good. Even once a week, just if you get some sort of routine to try these things, is great as well. And if you're not too much, all too busy, that's understandable too. That's one of the biggest challenges that I find for anybody who's starting these practices is trying to find the time to fit it into your schedule. And I see at the second question, have you found the practices helpful? 41% said somewhat, and 56% said very much. So that's also very encouraging. So thanks, that's excellent. Let me share the results. I think you can hopefully see them now. Good. Someone mentioned started going to yoga. That's also helpful. Yeah, there are a number of complementary kinds of things that you can be doing. And certainly doesn't have to be exactly what I'm suggesting in these classes. But I do think that whatever works for you, what I found is everybody kind of has their own way. And I've created my own practices in my own journey for doing this. So whatever works for you, a lot of people integrate it with things like going into things like nature, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but going for walks, and this is a great time of year for that. So integrating some of the practices in some of those things. This is another good comment. I'm enjoying the Peak Mind book. Good, an interesting read. Mentioned that in week 2, that was in the focus. So, and also as a reminder, I did send out the slides and the recording link. So if you missed a class, you could watch the recording, and you also have the slides to follow along, as well as I know some of you may not have been in maybe the first class or the second class. So if you need the recording link, I've been trying to keep up with the registration and sending those out afterwards. So if you didn't get it or you want a particular class, just let me know and I'll send you that information. So, all right, that's great. So let's move on to the topic for today, and that is that we all have heard of course, guidelines about being physically healthy, eating well, exercise, those kinds of things. But today is really all about our social health. How many of us have really thought seriously about our social lives and how important that is to our health and well-being? It's really a key to staying healthy, and it's a part of the whole equation or the formula, if you will. So eating well, sleeping well, exercise, all those kinds of things are so important, but quite interesting. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this. It's actually one of the longest longitudinal studies on health and happiness, probably the longest, started in 1938 at Harvard, and they studied longevity and happiness and relationships. In other words, what are the factors that make a good life? And so what do you think was the number one factor? It's probably pretty easy to guess since that's the topic of today's session. But it was actually, they found that the number one factor after studying people for the course of their lifetime, and then other people, they added lots of other people for to make it a diverse population. They found that the number one factor was that good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period, and contributes to our longevity. So, and here's 3 lessons that they found from the study. Social connections are really good for us, and that loneliness kills. And we've heard quite a bit about that loneliness can be certainly very detrimental to our health. And it's not just the number of friends that you have. It's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship even, but it's the quality of those close relationships that matters. And the third lesson, good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our brains. So these are just summaries. When you get the slides, if you want to look at, there's a number of YouTubes on this, but you can actually go to the actual source. Pretty sure there's a book on this as well. Dr. Robert Waldniger is one of I think he's the director of the study right now. And so there are a number, this is a link to one of the YouTubes, but there's a number, you'll see them on there if you just want to learn a little bit more about the study itself. But this is from him also. So just the idea that even small steps can make a difference. And as in the other classes that we talked about, so small steps for this is, as he says here, small actions day to day keep me connected with other people. I didn't used to, but then the research began to show people who do these things are happier, live longer, and stay healthier. So he started deliberately making dates with friends, going out to dinner with other guys, having a Friday noon meeting every week with my friend and a colleague, and make small, frequent contact with other people that he wanted to stay connected to. And this is kind of interesting. I think that he says texting counts. We'll address that too in a minute. But I think if you have a number of different kinds of connections, that's important. But as we stated before, it's the quality of those kinds of connections that are really important too. So I did want to include this. This is about our primary relationships, if you will. And so I found this. It's from the Science of Happiness podcast, which I've referenced before. But there is a link here. So it's kind of like a 7-day challenge, and how the 7 days how 7 days of simple, again, small practices can make a difference in your relationship. And just to kind of summarize, day one is all about just a simple 10-minute check-in with your partner or your mate. And number two is asking a big question, sort of like an open-ended question about what's important to you going forward, or what's important to the relationship. Number three is expressing gratitude towards that special someone, so saying thank you for some specific things. Number four is about compliments, so remembering to compliment those folks. Number five is asking for what you need, and also trying to be aware of what are the barriers to this. So this could be a difficult one for folks. So as you can see, as you go along in the week, it gets a little more difficult or a little bit more challenging. Number six is about practicing mini touch. So, small little things, touches and hugs and embraces and those kinds of things are very important. And number seven is the sacred date night. So making sure we take time to go out, and it doesn't have to be something expensive, but just getting together and going out and doing something together. So that's kind of a summary. If you want to read more about that, click on the link when I send the slides out, and you'll certainly learn quite a bit more about that. So it looks like somebody's asking, are you sharing the slides? I think maybe that's what you're saying. And yes, I will send the slides out. And again, if you didn't, for some reason, get them, I do probably send them later this afternoon or tomorrow morning, as well as the recording link. So let me know, and I'll be happy to make sure you do get them. So that's that one. But there's so much more to this than just that. And there are barriers, of course. And so this idea that we are living in a very distracted world, right? We have so much information, our smartphones in a way kind of make us dumb. And Dilbert kind of illustrates this, and he's talking to his coworker, and he's saying, studies say people are losing their ability to focus because of all the digital distractions. And his coworker is saying, got his phone in his hand there. That's, if you can't see that. And he's looking at his phone, so he's kind of not really paying attention. And he goes, sorry, what? And then Dilbert's interrupted by his cell phone. There's a little notification, and he pulls his phone out and says, the other guy says, what were you saying? And Dilbert says, I don't know. I probably wasn't that important. So he's totally lost track of what his original communication was. And in fact, yes, so much has been shown in many studies about how social media, for example, and other forms of our digital world can be so distracting and, kind of make us feel like we have ADHD. And so the piece on the bottom here, it's easy to rely on social media to nurture and maintain social relationships. A lot of us do that, but this convenience has a flip side. It lacks the depth and richness that comes from physically spending time together. So I think it's really all about balance, and it's all about the quality of those relationships. And so try to keep that in mind. Maybe do kind of a little bit of an audit of how you're doing that for yourself. So this is a little bit more on how relationships affect our health. This is again from the Greater Good magazine. And Cassie Killam, author of the book, The Art and Science of Connection. And these are all active links, by the way. So again, when you get this, you can read the article, or this is a link to the book on Amazon. But she argues that social health matters as much to our well-being as mental and physical health, and in fact, is interrelated to each and necessary for keeping us fit. So what does she mean by social health? So for her, it refers to a deeper connection, mutual support, and a good relationship with yourself. So that's key too. And we'll talk a little bit about self-compassion in today's session. And having the support you need and feeling cared for, understood, valued, and like you belong. So I think that's a really good definition for social health. And so here are just some quick tips on what we can do. And I think we all have different circumstances, right? Depending on our work lives, and maybe some of us are working from home and a lot of our connections are through a screen like we are doing today. Some of us do a hybrid kind of a schedule and see people in person, and some of us are at work face to face all the time. And so it really kind of depends on that part of your social health and your connections, as well as the rest of your family and your friends and all those other social networks that we're part of. So some of us, we need to stretch if the quantity is low. So if there's not a lot of connections, and keep it in mind, I do think it's important to keep them balanced in terms of the what we talked about before, the physical connections versus the digital connections. And then number two is rest if the quantity is high. So if you have too many connections and they might seem kind of very superficial, you might need to take a step back from that and rest a little bit. Number three is to increase closeness if the quality is low. So there's that, if there's too many digital or social media kinds of connections, you might need to increase the closeness of those. So maybe more getting together with people face to face will be helpful. And then flex if the quality is high. So if there's a lot of high quality connections, you might have to choose. You might have to create some boundaries about, and pick and choose which are the important ones on a particular day or during a particular week. And I found this kind of interesting. One study found that both introverts and extroverts benefited in their daily lives from having more frequent and deeper conversations with other people, even though you might not expect that for introverts. So depending on where you fall on that introvert-extrovert spectrum, it's important for all of us. And even though introverts may not get a lot of their energy from those kinds of situations where extroverts really thrive on, we still know that introverts get benefit from all sorts of connections, even connections like, and I'll talk about this in a minute, that, with people we might not normally speak to. And there's some tips on that as well. So more how-to, just a couple of guidelines. So some Canadian researchers actually created numeric guidelines, sort of like, we hear about, taking, say, 10,000 steps a day, or having certain caloric intake for our nutrition, or, different ways of having a balanced diet, or different kinds of exercise. Well, in the same way, they came up with some guidelines, and then that same author, Killam, gives her own prescription in a way for social health. So, and these are kind of prescriptive. So, you might find this helpful, or you might adjust them to meet your own needs. So first, connect with 5 different people every week. So a little bit of variety is helpful. Second, maintain at least 3 close relationships in general. And again, I mean, that's, I think, something you might want to tailor to your own circumstances. I remember coming across some research, even just showing that even having 1 or 2 close people in your life is good, is important. So this is saying, try to even stretch a little bit. 3 close relationships in general. So maintaining that. That could be between work, family, and friends. Maybe that's one way to divvy it up in a sense. And third, dedicate at least 1 hour each day to social interaction. And again, that may be hard for some of us depending on our situations, but you might want to pick a particular goal right now as something that you'll practice going forward to reach out and connect with people in maybe a little bit more variety or a little different ways. So whatever creates the best balance for you. So this is something I thought, again, some simple kind of guidelines. This is from the New York Times 7-Day Well Challenge. And if you want to read more about that, this is an active link on the bottom here. But basically, it's to first take stock of your relationships. So kind of what we were just talking about. Try the 8-minute phone call. This is kind of an interesting technique where, sometimes we might avoid speaking to someone on the phone because we know it's going to be longer than we have time for. So you might text that person and say, hey, look, I've just got a few minutes. I want to try this thing, 8-minute phone call. And we're going to, what they found in this article was that you actually can cover a lot of ground in 8 minutes. That kind of puts boundaries on it. And it kind of helps you in our busy, very overscheduled world, helps us to fit those kinds of things in. Chat up someone you don't know. This is could be somebody, in the store, or you're waiting in line or something like that. Talking to a stranger, whether it's about something just sort of routine or the weather or sports or something like that, thank someone special. So gratitude is an important part of this. Get closer to a colleague, maybe somebody that you don't know, maybe have a cup of coffee with somebody that you'd like to get to know better on your work team or somebody that you interact with, occasionally, but might want to reach out to. And then put a social plan on your calendar. Sometimes we need to do that. It's the same idea where we need to make sure it gets planned out and put on the calendar so it happens. And then the 7th is keep it going. So more goals, committed to consistency, and having some rituals. So I know I belong to a cycling group, for example, and we meet, it's not a lot, but we meet every other month on a Friday evening. And we're kind of spread out now. So it's a hybrid meeting. So some will join on Zoom and some are there in person. And, we just kind of make it happen. We've been doing it for a long number of years now. And so it helps us keep that ongoing connection. And something like that might be quite helpful. All right, so let's turn now a little bit to compassion. So keeping in mind, this really gets into the sort of the quality of cultivating a sense of compassion and how we can do that for ourselves and others. And I don't know a lot about this, but I came across this idea of mirror neurons. And basically, it's when we connect with other people, there is a strengthening of those neural pathways so that when you are in close contact with somebody, and we do these kinds of practices to improve our social health, it creates these, what you might call as mirror neurons. And that's sort of the actual biochemistry in our brains that show that sense of connection. But under stress and pressure, those compassion circuits can be blocked. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. and the importance of taking care of ourselves, especially when we're under stress, because those can get in the way. And if you think about it, it's kind of obvious. So mindfulness can really help with this. So studies have also been shown that mindfulness helps that part of the brain that cultivates and strengthens our empathy, which of course is connected with compassion. So that's the ability to recognize when someone's hurt or afraid. So, and then be able to feel with them, so to empathize with them, and to bring up that tenderness of compassion. And in fact, one of the classic ways that we do, and we'll practice this in a couple of minutes, is a loving kindness type meditation. And you might have been in some of my classes before where we've done a similar kind of practice, where you actually bring someone to mind. And this can be a variety of different people. It could be somebody that you're close to. It can be somebody who's that kind of neutral person. It could even be somebody who's difficult in your life. And in the meditation, and you'll see how this works when we give it a try, in the meditation, you actually send them messages of care and compassion. And what the studies show, that even though it sounds kind of rote in a sense, and even maybe a little bit superficial, but when we bring up that sort of message to ourselves and kind of sending it from our own heart, in a sense, it really makes a difference, and it really strengthens our compassion muscle. So we will try that in the practice when I get to that. Now, another thing that similar to stress, hopefully you're not experiencing high levels of stress or burnout, but I just found this article kind of interesting. So again, another link to a Forbes magazine article, that burnout can, of course, get in the way of social connections. So research shows that it creates more social withdrawal when we feel burned out. And that kind of makes sense, right? But it creates a vicious cycle. So the more isolated we become, the harder it is to break free from burnout's grip. It affects the family dynamics, of course. So when we're burned out, we need our families most, but it shows that this stress tsunami, the studies really show that anxiety levels have risen quite significantly in the past couple of years, and that emotional exhaustion, which is one of the characteristics of burnout, makes it hard for us to be present. So just think about it. If you're kind of really emotionally exhausted, all you want to do is, when you get home, is just maybe sit and watch TV, or veg out, or not really be paying attention to others. Although I really think that can be one of the antidotes, but it's harder to make that jump. So keep that in mind. And then also it can affect our friendships as well. So burnout can severely impact friendships, and the energy to maintain those can be overwhelming, leading to neglect and erosion of those connections. So in a way, this can also lead us to how we are treating ourselves. And this is an important part of the overall equation. Developing a sense of self-compassion and kindness to ourselves is really important. Before I jump into this, let me pause and see, do we have any questions? Any kind of covered a lot of ground with that connection and compassion information there. You can use the chat feature, or if you want to speak up, that's okay too. But any questions at this point? So just pause for a second, maybe take a deep breath, be kind to yourself, settle in, make yourself comfortable. As I said, if you're having lunch, that's fine. Any questions at this point? All right, well, if you do, let me know. So it's so important when we are thinking about relationships and all those connections, and trying to deepen those and strengthen that muscle, in a sense, One of the things that can really get in the way is our own inner critic. And we can get hard on ourselves, and we say things to ourselves that we would never say to, our best friend. So it's really important to first of all, be aware of those messages that we might be saying to ourselves when we're not being at our best, or when we're not showing up um, in a sense. So it's just really important to kind of like be aware of those, and to try to think about what would you say to your best friend who's in that same situation. So in other words, if you had just said something kind of thoughtlessly to a friend or a coworker, and you reflect back on it maybe later in the day or in the next day or something, and you realize that it didn't come out the way that you wanted it to sound, or maybe that person took it a certain way and reacted to it. And you might begin to get down on yourself, right? So it's that awareness, first of all, of what maybe you should have said, and shoulds are a big part of this. And you can kind of get kind of down on yourself. So if that was your friend who was telling you about it, what would you say to them? What kinds of messages would you say to them? Probably something like, "Oh, well, we can't be perfect, right? We all have a lot of things that are going on in our lives, and sometimes we don't think before we speak." So in other words, you try to be supportive, and we try to coach instead of being critical of our good friend. So it's those kinds of messages that we would tell our friends about, that we want to tell ourselves. And that's what self-compassion really is all about. Let me just check these here, see a few comments here. Yeah, good comment on the Harvard study is interesting to think about. It reminds me of um, Ubuntu. Not familiar with that. I am because we are. Interesting. For social connection, some of our friends started a book club, and it has kept us more closely connected. Excellent. Like that. My group gym classes have also been a great venue. These are great examples. Thank you for sharing that. So that is a good one. I am more empathetic with others than myself. So thank you for sharing that. I think many of us tend to be, and that's really the key, is to see sometimes when we are not as empathetic or compassionate with ourselves. And so what do we do? Well, here are the three elements of self-compassion. The first is self-kindness. So that, again, that sense of when we suffer or fail or feel inadequate or do something or say something that we kind of get down on ourselves, to remember to be kind to ourselves. The second is what we would call common humanity. And that's the realization that we're not alone in this. And sometimes it feels like we're alone when we're going through something where we're getting down on ourselves, or we're going through something where we feel kind of like we're having a very difficult, challenging time. We tend to be a little bit more self-centered about that. And we tend to think that I'm the only one who's going through that. But to realize that there are plenty of others, and just think about support groups, for example, and how helpful they can be. That's why support groups work, because others who have been through similar circumstances can really support you and have that empathy and compassion. The third element is mindfulness. So it's that sense of being aware of when we need that self-compassion. And so it's actually, those are in somewhat reverse order. So here's a quick little exercise that you can try going forward. Might be something that you can do. So if there's a situation that you're struggling with, kind of keeping that in your head, notice the thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. So those are the three key things. So this first part is the mindfulness part, being aware and noticing what's going on internally, thoughts, feelings, and body sensations. Take a deep breath so that we don't automatically get caught up in that or swept away. And then say to yourself, yes, others feel this way too. I'm not alone. Take another deep breath and then finish with, I will be kind to myself. I will give myself what I need, whatever that might be, compassion, nurturing, or support. Quick little exercise or mini break that you can try. And basically, that's the order. So it's the mindfulness first, being aware of it, common humanity, realizing that you're not alone, that others feel this way too. And then being kind to yourself is the third and final element of that. What this does is kind of creates space, the space that we need so that we don't react to it automatically, so that we have a little bit of time and space to realize that we can, be mindful of it, be aware of what's going on in the body, in our feelings, in our thoughts, take a couple of deep breaths, and then we can begin to be a little bit more compassionate to ourselves. And the research actually shows that when we do practice self-compassion, we feel less anxious and stressed. We're more likely to feel happy and resilient. And this can actually have some beneficial effects to our body, reducing our heart rate, and inflammation, and improving sleep. So stuff really works. And this particular slide is just simply about the idea that, so I think many of us are able to give compassion quite easily if somebody is asking for your help, somebody close to you is in need. Very often it's a natural response to do that. But the flip side of that, my slides went away. What happened?
We could still see it.
You can't.
Now we could. Now it's back.
Okay, great. So it went away on me all of a sudden. So I was starting to go, what did I do wrong? See, that's sort of the natural. What button did I hit? What did I do wrong? You idiot, but that's kind of the natural thing that arises in how we can be critical of ourselves. So this is an intro. We're going to do the practice in a minute or two. That nicely balances out giving and receiving compassion for ourselves in this practice. And you'll see how this works. So I'm going to combine a couple of things in this connection and compassion practice. So this is the practice for today. Let me just check on the time. This will take maybe, let's say, about 8 minutes or so. So if you were eating, I would say, if you can, put aside your lunch and just try to pay attention as we go through this practice. I'm going to lead you in a meditation that combines a number of these things: caring for ourselves and accepting care, as well as trying some of that loving kindness kind of practice, which is sending messages of care and compassion to ourselves and to others. So let's begin. Let's start simply by finding a good, comfortable position. So taking a moment to adjust your posture and your body in a very caring and compassionate way. So that's the first thing, is to be comfortable and relaxed. And you can close your eyes if you like, although you don't have to. If you prefer, you can keep them slightly open with a downward, unfocused gaze. And just turn inwards and just sense your body. Again, feel free to adjust a little bit, finding a really good, comfortable position for your legs and your arms and your torso and your shoulder, and just nice and balanced. And if you need to do a couple of stretches to release tension, you can do that. If you feel tension in the shoulders or the jaw, for example, you can just feel into that area. You can even breathe into that. And as you breathe out, let the tension release a little bit. So just really using the breath to kind of release tension, especially as you breathe out. this can really help us to relax and release that tension. So the first part of the breathing is to focus on the body, as we just did. The second is to focus on caring for someone, and the third focus will be on being cared for ourselves. So breathing into the body, bring to mind caring for someone. This could be a family member or a friend or a colleague or even a pet. And just get that sense of what it feels like to care for someone else. And pay attention to what this feels like in the body, in your mind, and in your heart as well. So there can be a receiving into the self this feeling of compassion for those who may be burdened at this time. And focusing mainly on your good wishes for them, for that person or persons that you're thinking about. And you might send them simple messages like, may you be safe. May you be healthy. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you live with ease. Now, these are some of the traditional thoughts and messages that we send out, but you can customize this for yourself. But for now, I'll just stick with those. And then you might also include yourself with that person. We all suffer. We all have things that we're going through. And you might even imagine yourself sitting with that person and saying to you and your loved one, may we be safe. May we be healthy and happy. May we be free from suffering. May we live with ease. And just take a moment to sit with these messages for yourself and that other person. Let those messages of care and compassion land and see what they feel like for you. Now, we can include others in this, so you can include somebody who's kind of neutral in your life, someone you don't know that well, someone you cross paths with, but you don't really know them well, but you can also include them, bringing them into your mind and your heart and say, may you be safe. May you be healthy and happy. May you be free from suffering and may you live with ease. You know, and in these turbulent times, there may be those who challenge you. There may be those you find difficult. There may be plenty of situations that you come across in these uncertain times. And so you can include that person or persons in your thoughts and in your messages of care and compassion. And say to them, may you be safe. May you be healthy and happy. Realizing that everybody wants to be happy, right? May you be free from suffering and may you live with ease. And of course, we can continue on. We could continue on expanding those circles to the rest of our friends and family and loved ones. We could expand to all living beings. We could expand out all that to every person, every living being on this island planet that we call Earth. May we all be happy and safe and healthy. May we all be free from suffering and live with ease. And so part of that includes accepting and sending those messages to ourselves. So we're going to finish with this kind of combined breathing in for ourselves and out for others. So coming back to awareness of your breathing, feel that in breath and then the out breath. Just pay attention to the breathing for a cycle of two of breathing in and out. And now focus mainly on the in breath. Take a nice deep in breath. And as you breathe in, bring in a sense of nurturing for yourself. Whatever it is that you might need today or in this moment. And as you breathe in, breathe that quality in for yourself. Whether it's care or kindness or compassion or whatever it might be, focus, connection, relaxing. And on each in-breath, bring in that sense of nourishing and nurturing for yourself. And now we're going to focus mainly on the out-breath. And as we breathe out and we feel the out-breath, bring to mind that person that you know of who might need some care and compassion. And as you breathe out a sense of that same care and compassion. Now, this could be in the form of a word like kindness or love or compassion or care, whatever it might be that you send out to that other person. Or could this be simply a feeling of warmth or an image of a golden light? So with each out breath, send something good to this other person. So as we continue to breathe out, send that word or image or feeling to that other person. And then as we begin to finish, bring them together. So as you breathe in, breathing in for you. As you breathe out, breathing out for the other. So breathing in for you, sense of care and compassion. And breathing out for that other person. And just rest in these feelings of care and compassion for a moment before we close. And when you're ready, if you've had your eyes closed, feel free to open them. Take a moment to rise from that meditation and maybe stretch and move a little bit, reconnect with your surroundings. And so that's kind of a combination of loving kindness meditation and that balanced breathing in and breathing out. And so you might give that a try. Now, I'll show you some ways before we close. I know we're just about at a closing time, but I do have some slides to show you. This is a nice little exercise. You don't have time to try it. Plus, it's kind of hard on Zoom. But you might try this with just one other person. So you choose somebody, you let that person talk for about 2 minutes about anything, about the weekend or whatever, some plan that you might have. And your job as the listener is just to listen without talking at all for 2 minutes. And just notice that you'll feel distracted. You'll feel like you want to add, you want to chime in, but just listen. And then switch roles and you talk and have the other person listen and you just talk and they're not allowed to interrupt. All they can do is listen. Now you can use nonverbal kind of body language to do this exercise, but just notice and then process it together. It's kind of interesting. It's hard to do. It's hard to just listen, but it's kind of interesting to notice what comes up in your own mind and the kinds of things that are on your agenda rather than listening. The idea is to just really notice what it's like to just completely and totally listen to that other person's agenda. So this quote here is just a nice way to kind of summarize a lot of this, is that these kinds of meditation practices aren't about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It's about befriending who we already are. And that's from Pema Chodron. Here are a number of practices. So if you want to try some different practices, these are all links for different kinds of related practices. And then there's a number of videos too. These are all pretty brief videos that you can try out. So again, I'll send the slides to everybody so you'll have these. There is an app. I've mentioned this a number of times, but just as an example, on that app, they do have a 3-episode practice called Cultivating Compassion. And then I do have a monthly mindfulness class. So if you're not already on that, you can find that on LMS. And it's called Monthly Mindfulness. So we do this tomorrow, actually, is the second Wednesday. So feel free. It's not February. I forgot to change that date there. But so tomorrow is our next one, but it happens every month on the second Wednesday of the month. And then, of course, we still do the phone meditations. And there's the app again. And then more resources. So just to give you some different ways to continue your practice. The program itself, just a reminder about EFR, and something brand new, something called our health coaching through Thrive. And if you want to reach out, they're actually starting to do this now. There is an email on the bottom here. So that would be how you can get in touch with one of the health coaches for any of these kinds of issues that you want to do one-on-one health coaching for. And then Thrive, you can find us on the intranet. So you go to T, Thrive, and you'll see the whole Thrive come up. That's where a lot of our information is. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for joining me today. Appreciate you coming and being with me for these 4 weeks. Whenever we covered a lot of ground, so I hope you will continue to follow through with some of these. So I'm going to go back to this. How can I join from my phone in the future if there's a meeting code? So, okay, let me answer a couple of these questions before we finish. Does Thrive Health Coaching cost money? No, it's completely free. It's for any employee, and you don't have to be in the health plan. So any employee who wants to use the health coaching can take advantage of that. I see many of your thanks. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so if you want to join, let me go back to that. If this is what you're asking about, bring that up again. Let me stop the recording. Do that first.